There's no two ways about it. If you support a team, you have a rival. And for as long as you can remember rooting for your team, you also remember rooting against another team. It could just be the look of their players, the attitude of their fans, or just the color of their kit that could set you off. You might not have even known why you and everyone in your family hated your rivals, but some of the actual reasons behind the biggest clashes in world football might shock you, with most of them being lost to time. Plus, make sure to stick around to the end of this video for a bonus rivalry unlike any other in world football. So without further ado, let's look into some of the most iconic, dramatic, and violent rivalries around the world. The year is 1878. It's the height of the Industrial Revolution, and Manchester's influence has gone worldwide. The invention of the railroad and the steamboat has completely revolutionized humanity, making Manchester one of the wealthiest hubs for international trade and business in the entire world. Those who were able to get an early ticket to this revolution were able to obtain unimaginable wealth and influence that would shape the world economy for centuries to come. But it wasn't just the wealthy elite shaping the world, because next to a bustling station in Manchester, a few railroad workers were also devising a plan that would change history forever. After constructing a small, gritty pitch near the railway they worked at, Manchester United was born. Okay, well, they were actually called Newton Heath at this time, but they would soon change their name after facing financial difficulty in 1902. And just 2 years after their inception, a similar plan was being devised just a few miles down the road. Or I guess, railway? A group of regulars at St. Mark's Church decided to make a football club to rival the up-and-coming Newton Heath, and in 1880, the rivalry was officially born. From the get-go, United and City were culturally different clubs, despite being just a couple miles apart. Founded by the railway workers who quite literally built the city, United were seen as a traditional, old-fashioned team, whereas City were more seen as a modern, ambitious club. And at first, history and tradition would dominate Manchester, and all of England for that matter. The 20th century was United's own, consistently being the team to beat in both the domestic league and in cup competitions. Players like Sir Bobby Charlton, George Best, and Dennis Law defined the Red Devils' golden years, when no other team in England could touch them. Man City, on the other hand, experienced a turbulent 20th century, unable to keep pace with their Mancunian neighbors, at least not for an extended period of time. They spent over 10 years in the second division, including a relegation 1 year after winning the top division in 1937. However, City weren't the only team to see relegation in the 1900s. Another relegation occurred after one of the most infamous Manchester derbies of all time in 1974. United needed a win to stay in the top flight, and their penultimate match would be against their fiercest rivals. In dramatic fashion, Dennis Law, previously mentioned Man United legend, scored the deciding goal in the fixture with a cheeky backheel in the 81st minute. Although he refused to celebrate against his former club, this was so infuriating to the United fans that they stormed the pitch in protest, which saw the game abandoned just a few minutes later. However, the result was allowed to stand, and United were booted from the top flight in an embarrassing manner.
Dennis has done it! And no elation there at all from Dennis Law.
However, this embarrassment was short-lived, as Sir Alex Ferguson was appointed manager in the 1980s, marking United's most ruthless and dominant era in the club's history. They would reach heights no club has ever seen before, winning nearly 40 trophies, including 13 Premier League titles, 2 Champions Leagues, and even a treble in 1999. Speaking of trebles, make sure to check out my every treble winning team explained in 25 minutes down below. But Man City was about to embark on a dominant era of its own, marked by the Abu Dhabi Group's acquisition of the club in 2008, priced at around £200 million. This significantly increased City's spending power, with facilities, staff, and most importantly, signings. City's era as the biggest team in Manchester began in 2012 when Sergio Aguero scored the game-winning goal against QPR to steal the title from United in what's undoubtedly the single greatest moment in football history. Since then, City have dominated English football, just as United had, winning 6 Premier Leagues under Pep since 2016. This even included a four-peat from 2020 to 24, a feat that not even Sir Alex Ferguson was able to achieve. Similar to the Manchester Derby, the Milan Derby is one of the oldest in world football. Also known as the Derby della Madonna, this classic Italian clash is named after the statue of the Madonna on top of the Milan Cathedral. The older of the two clubs, AC Milan, was started as a joint football and cricket club run by the Milanese high society. With this high status, deep pockets, and a lack of real competition at the time, came pretty undisputed success. Between 1901 and 1907, they won 3 National League titles. However, soon after this third trophy, one of the largest divergences in football history occurred, one that would shape European football forever. After a major dispute over whether to open their doors to international signings, the Milan club spiraled into a civil war, divided right down the middle. Those who wished to honor tradition and nationality remained at the club, while those who were ambitious enough to take this next step created an entirely new team that would bring in international talent to build their club. And this is where Internazionale Milan got its name. Similar to the Manchester Derby, this was a case of old versus new, tradition and history versus change and innovation. But what was much different than the Manchester Derby, different from all other derbies, was the incredible fact that the two enemies share the same home stadium. The San Siro was constructed in 1925, just 1 year before the opening of the Divisione Nazionale, the early version of the Serie A. The clubs quickly went from only playing each other once every couple of years to playing each other twice per season, and under the same roof, no less. And this is when the internationally minded Milanese side truly saw their vision come to life. With the mix of Italian nationals and talent from all corners of the globe, Inter leaped ahead of Milan, who were unable to keep up with such a large talent pool that their rivals had the luxury of choosing from. The blue side of Milan became a poster child for diversity, becoming one of the first clubs to have players from all different ethnicities come together on a football pitch and work as a team. Between 1928 and 1938, Inter won 10 derbies della Madonna and drew 7. AC Milan won 0. And with this decade-long drought, AC Milan finally started to consider opening their doors and not having an exclusively Italian club. There was quite literally no other way to compete with their San Siro roommates anymore. And whether it was out of necessity, embarrassment, or the kindness of their heart, AC Milan lifted their internal restrictions around transfer windows, finally allowing them to diversify their squad sheet. And to no surprise, they made a huge comeback as a team. By the late 1940s and 1950s, foreign players such as the famous Swedish trio consisting of Gunnar Gren, Gunnar Nordahl, and Nils Lidholm were key to Milan's success, with the team winning the domestic title in the 1950-51 season. This was their first league title in 44 years. Despite both sides' extensive European success, their first meeting outside of domestic matches wasn't until the 2002 Champions League semi-final. It was a tight contest, but Milan were able to advance, ironically via away goals, considering both legs were played at the same stadium. But the greatest ever meeting of Italy's two most successful clubs was in the quarterfinals of the 04-05 Champions League season. After a 2-0 home win, Milan were winning 1-0 in the second leg. Furious with their team's performance, Inter fans protested by shooting hundreds of flares onto the pitch, with one even striking Milan's keeper, Dida. This resulted in the abandonment of the match, and fans on both sides condemned the behavior of those who shot flares onto the pitch. You know what else is behavior that should be condemned? I've come across countless videos in this format where channels are using entirely AI to make their videos. No personality, no soul, no wabi-sabi. These videos take up to 50 hours to make, but I'm determined to make content that's actually enjoyable, not just some AI slop. So if you guys enjoy my content, please leave a like and subscribe, as most of you watching haven't yet. It goes a huge way to boost the channel. Okay, now back to the video. Despite the Inter fans' poor sportsmanship, this spectacle of flares and fireworks set the stage for one of the greatest images in the history of the sport. After Milan and Inter's period of dominance in the 90s and early 2000s, their northern Italian neighbor, Juventus, exploded into the limelight and had a firm grasp on the Serie A in the 2010s. Milan and Inter fell far behind Antonio Conte and then Allegri's Turin Terminators, who won the Scudetto 9 times in a row. However, the 2020s have been kinder to Milan, with Inter winning the title in 2021 and 2024, and Milan winning in 2022. The match between Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund is much different than the Manchester Derby and the Derby della Madonna. They aren't city rivals or even regional ones, and their competition isn't based on some predated social, economic, or religious differences between the two fan bases. This German rivalry, known as Der Klassiker, was strictly born because, well, they're really their only competition in the domestic campaign. I know recently they've had other contenders such as the history-making Never Losing side, as well as Wolfsburg in the 2010s. And this has been true throughout the history of German football, as various challengers have emerged sporadically, briefly taking center stage before fading back into the background once more. However, over the decades, the Bundesliga has been dominated by red and yellow. In fact, 26 of the last 31 Bundesliga trophies have been lifted by one of these sides, although much more of them can be attributed to Bayern. Although this is a more recent rivalry compared to the historic clashes we've seen in Italy and England, this is arguably one of the biggest in all of world football. Shockingly, these two clubs have averaged the highest match attendance over the years, with Bayern averaging 75,000 fans per match and Dortmund averaging an incredible 81,300. Despite Dortmund's superiority in ticket sales, the results have been inversely correlated. Even though the Bundesliga was founded in Dortmund in 1964, the Black and Yellows didn't manage to win their first title until 1995 with legendary manager Hitzfeld. They were able to defend their title the next season, one of only 2 times they've won back-to-back domestic titles. He also carried them to a UEFA Champions League trophy in 1997, where they beat Juventus at Olympia Stadium, Bayern's home stadium, funnily enough. Although blood has been shed between these German juggernauts, there's a mutual sense of respect from both the fans and the clubs themselves. In 2003, Dortmund were having a nightmare of a season, both on and off the pitch. Finishing in 10th place was the least of their worries, however, as the club was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy due to poor financial management. The board even considered selling their iconic stadium just to make it through to the next season. However, they were able to just about get by as Bayern sent them an unprompted €2 million donation to help keep them afloat. Additionally, cutting their players' salaries by 20% enabled Dortmund to stay in the black. It was this heroic gesture from Bayern that quite possibly saved the club from collapse, and it's a significant reason why the club remains standing today. I wonder if it was out of the kindness of Bayern's hearts, or some sort of like a Batman and Joker kind of situation, where the Joker secretly needs Batman because he really has no other competition standing in his way, and things just get boring if he isn't around. The Klassiker truly came to a climax when Jurgen Klopp was appointed manager manager in 2008, following his success with fellow Bundesliga competitor Mainz. This was up there with the strongest of Dortmund sides in history, winning back-to-back titles in 2011 and 2012. Out of their 5 competitive fixtures during this time, Dortmund won all 5 against Bayern, putting them in a position they really weren't used to. But Bayern had a chance for rebuttal in one of the greatest classicers of all time, where they would meet in the 2013 Champions League final. Things started off according to plan, as Neuer kept the Bayern goal safe with 5 saves in the first 35 minutes, and Mandzukic gave Bayern an early second-half lead with a left-footed finish. However, Dortmund would throw a wrench in their plans for an easy victory, as Gundogan equalized just minutes later from the spot. Bayern had less than half an hour to secure the Champions League trophy and etch their names into footballing history. And in almost as dramatic a fashion as Sir Alex Ferguson's Man United, Robben took the game by the scruff of the neck, scoring a game winner in the 90th minute. All it took was one Flying Dutchman and one scuffed kick to immortalize the 2012-13 Bayern Munich team, securing the club's first ever treble. Since Jurgen's departure from Dortmund to Liverpool, the Klassiker has perhaps lost some of its notoriety and competitive edge, as the gap between the German sides has increased once again, with Bayern winning 12 of the 13 Bundesliga titles since the Klassiker Champions League final. When you hear the words El Clasico, you might think about 2 players rather than 2 teams. However, the rivalry between the Spanish world beaters goes much farther back than Messi versus Ronaldo. The spectacle receives a global audience of hundreds of millions every year, as these are 2 of the most internationally supported teams in the world. This is a rivalry defined by celebration, mockery, and pride, a game that will always pique the interest of fans around the world. But although the match of the Spanish Titans has maintained its cultural relevance, the history behind these 2 clubs' hatred towards one another has largely been forgotten. The rivalry is very politically charged because of the Catalan independence movement, since Madrid is the capital of Spain and seen as the face of the Spanish Unionists, whereas Barcelona is by far the largest city in the region of Catalonia, which has long fought for independence. Francisco Franco's dictatorship was a bleak and violent time for those in the region of Catalonia. One of his first political actions as the Spanish leader was to nullify the 1932 Statute of Autonomy, stripping Catalonia of its official language, pride, and independence. Even further, Franco killed multiple Catalonian revolutionaries and leaders and attempted a cultural genocide, banning any Catalonian flags and symbols to be shown in public. This was the foundation for El Clasico, and this wasn't just a figurative battle between the 2 football teams. It was a literal one, with a history of bloodshed and suppression. And largely due to this troubled past, this rivalry has been among the largest spectacles in football history. But history aside, Barca and Madrid have been 2 of the strongest teams in the world, consistently fighting for domestic and continental trophies. This has made the rivalry one of the major sporting events over the years, as it's always an incredibly close matchup. In fact, over the past 124 years, Real Madrid have only won 2 more matches than Barca, with their record consisting of 106 wins, 52 draws, and 104 losses. As previously mentioned, the Clasico will forever be defined as the Messi-Ronaldo rivalry of the 2010s. The 2 greatest footballers of all time, playing for 2 of the greatest teams of all time, going to battle in front of the world stage in one of history's fiercest football matches. It was a case of art versus science, beauty versus discipline. Both players pushed each other to heights never seen in the game before. They looked alien at times, with Ronaldo redefining what was considered possible when it came to performance and athleticism, and Messi doing what no man has done or will likely ever do with the ball at his foot. It was a fairy tale of a decade, and regardless of who you may consider the GOAT, you can't not appreciate both of these demigods of football. We may never see players of this caliber again, and because of this, the Clasico just hasn't quite felt the same ever since. It's still the greatest rivalry in football, sure, but it just isn't quite the same as when you saw those 2 names in the starting lineups. Despite what you might have thought, Olympique Marseille was the team that historically dominated French football. Most people don't realize that, although PSG is and has been one of the international powerhouses this century, the club actually wasn't founded until 1970. Marseille's first rivals were Bordeaux and Saint-Etienne, but as those clubs fell into the shadows, so did Ligue 1, and there was no longer any competition in France. Marseille were strolling through the league campaign every year, and what was once a spectacle of competition and sport became a bore. With TV viewership and match attendance consistently tanking, the industry needed to devise a solution to address this. Although their national team still caught the world's eye due to their superstar-filled roster and constant trophy contention, fans just weren't invested in watching one club dominate all of League One while the rest of the teams fought for scraps. The audience was there, for sure. They just needed to create enough competition to hook the fans back in. And France's largest pay TV network, Canal+, came up with an elaborate plan. Not only did Canal+ buy PSG, but they also dumped money into spreading the notion that the Parisian club and Marseille were sworn enemies. And who was behind this campaign? Marseille's president himself, businessman Bernard Tapie. And with a lot of money spent and a sprinkling of propaganda, the league was revived, and it was now a second contender in the title race every season. The whole sworn enemies agenda from the media conglomerate really stuck, and the 2 clubs became obsessed with defeating their rival. The fans were pitted against each other, blinded with rage and hatred for their rivals, even if they couldn't really remember why. Things in Marseille would take a sinister turn in the 1990s under Tapier's oversight. Spreading propaganda over a fabricated rivalry seemed like a non-problem compared to this next scandal. The president was found guilty of match fixing in a Ligue 1 game against Valenciennes. Marseille were about to face AC Milan in the Champions League final just 6 days after this match, and Tapier wanted to make sure his squad was fresh heading into the biggest game in the club's history. In an act of deceit and desperation, he secretly reached out to multiple Valenciennes players and offered large sums of cash to them if they underperformed in their upcoming fixture. Most of the players agreed, except for one, who ended up telling the authorities. This was one of the biggest scandals in all of French football, in all of European football, and it saw Marseille's Ligue 1 title stripped, and even led to jail time for Tapier. However, things got even more complicated, as the president was tangled up in Canal Plus's silent rule over French football. Rather than giving the league title to PSG, who finished in second place, they decided against this, as Canal Plus thought that this would upset their Marseille fans, who made up a large portion of their subscribers. So, to keep their business, they decided to just scrap the league title that year, and no one was awarded the trophy in 1993. The most notable change in the dynamic of La Classique since the turn of the century was QSI's acquisition of PSG in 2011. Similar to the Manchester derby, this influx of cash via new investors and owners totally tipped the scales in PSG's favor. They were able to make marquee, internet-breaking signings each year, including Ibra, Mbappe, Neymar, and Messi, just to name a few. And ironically, PSG, the team that was created to make the league more competitive, had completely wiped out any competition in the process, and the league was once again a one-sided affair. Most people think that El Tráfico is the biggest MLS rivalry, due to its quirky name and high-profile players, but people forget that LAFC is only 11 years old. This club is younger than Yamal. To find out the most historic rivalry in the MLS, we need to head farther north. Portland Timbers and Seattle Sounders rivalry, referred to as the Cascadia Cup, is the most significant and longest-standing feud in American soccer. These two sides are a mere 2.5-hour journey from each other, which always makes for a great derby. There are rarely better excuses for hatred than proximity. This beef predates the MLS by a considerable margin, with the first meeting of the clubs dating back to 1975, over 20 years before the league's inception. Seattle won 1-0. But although Seattle has more wins in overall meetings of the sides, Portland has had just a slightly better record in the MLS, with 20 wins to Seattle's 19. They also compete in a preseason round robin, which is also known as the Cascadia Cup, named after the biome that includes Northern California, Washington State, Oregon, and British Columbia. This is why they also face the third competitor of this preseason cup, the Vancouver Whitecaps. But this doesn't feel like a friendly preseason competition. Massive crowds come out to watch this violent spectacle between the two Pacific Northwest juggernauts, and it's not just the MLS that experiences these massive crowds. The NWSL record attendance was set in this fixture, with 45,000 fans attending a 2-0 win for the Timbers. One of the most infamous moments in this rivalry came from a goal scored by Roger Levesque. Just 48 seconds into the match, Levesque scored a diving header to give the Sounders an early lead, and what he did next would be immortalized in the Cascadia Cup. On the way to the match, Levesque and his teammate devised a plan for a goal celebration while on the team bus, one that would mock the Timbers and fire up the Sounders supporters, and when this opportunity arose, he didn't back down.
And then all of a sudden when he grabbed me, it clicked. Oh yeah, goal celebration.
This dramatic display would go down in MLS folklore and cement the rivalry between the two clubs, and to this day, the rivalry remains the biggest in American soccer. Although you've seen the emergence of the newer, shinier clubs such as Inter Miami, LAFC, and San Diego FC, the Cascadia Cup will always be an ode to the pioneers of the sport in the United States. Next, we're moving across the pond to Portugal, where the biggest rivalry takes place right in their capital. The Lisbon Derby took off in 1907 when 8 Benfica players moved to Sporting, which was seen as the aristocratic elite club. These guys were clout chasing before it was even a thing. They walked so LA micro-influencers could run. Benfica is associated with the working class of Portugal, with ties to the large African immigrant population in the capital. In fact, one of the most notable Benfica and Portuguese players of all time, Eusebio, also known as the Black Panther, was born in Portuguese Mozambique. Benfica is widely renowned as the more successful club throughout history, both domestically and continentally. However, the derby brings out a fiery competitiveness that surpasses this gap in quality, and the head-to-head between the two Lisbon clubs is actually surprisingly even. Of their 325 meetings, Benfica has only managed to win 139, drawing 70 times and losing 116. The most notable of these historical matchups happened in 2011, and not for the match itself, but the drama and destruction that ensued after the final whistle. After a 1-0 away defeat, the traveling Sporting fans came up with a devious plan to set fire to Benfica's Stadium of Light, just so it could live up to its name. However, the brave Benfica fans stepped in and helped prevent the flames from engulfing the entire stadium, and the damage was reduced to just one away section of the stands. You feel like an army going into enemy territory, says Felipe Ingles, who runs the podcast Benfica FM. We're going there to represent Benfica on the stands as much as the players represent us on the field, and we give everything. Amsterdam's Ajax versus Rotterdam's Feyenoord is a clash of ideologies and cultures, even though the two cities are just a few miles apart. Amsterdam is more of an artsy, aristocratic city, whereas Rotterdam is more working-class laborers, or at least that was the historical dynamic between the two cities. Rotterdam natives often believe that those from Amsterdam have delusions of grandeur, and this is summarized by their favorite saying, which translates to, "While Amsterdam dreams, Rotterdam works." Or, to translate even further, "You've got soft hands, brother." While Ajax has been the more successful club in the Netherlands, the derby has always been a spectacle, despite Feyenoord being the third most successful club in the country, falling behind PSV. But some of the most prestigious of footballers have played for both of these clubs, which just magnified the intensity of their rivalry. Johan Cruyff, Dennis Bergkamp, Ruud Gullit, and Ronald Koeman are just a few of the elite Dutch players to have suited up for both teams. This feud, known as De Klassieker, can be summarized by a decades-long B-measuring contest between the clubs over who had the biggest stadium in the country. The Olympic Stadium was constructed in 1928 and had a capacity of 31,000, which was the biggest in the Netherlands. In 1934, De Meer Stadium was constructed with a capacity of 22,000. Ajax used the Olympic Stadium for European matches and De Meer Stadium for domestic matches. The status of the Olympic Stadium as the largest in the Netherlands would change in 1937 with the construction of Feyenoord's De Kuip Stadium, which has a capacity of 64,000, almost tripling Ajax's capacity. Ajax responded by adding a second ring to the Olympic Stadium, also in 1937. After the Second World War, Feyenoord expanded De Kuip to 69,000 seats in 1949. Despite the Netherlands ranking among the highest nations in the safety index, this has been one of the more violent derbies in recent history. Incidents have included the murder of fans in altercations, burning down clubhouses, and throwing rocks through team bus windows. Although not extremely well known, the Belgrade Derby, also referred to as the Eternal Rivalry, is undoubtedly one of the fiercest rivalries in the whole of world football. It definitely lives up to its name. This clash involves Serbia's capital city, Belgrade's two best sides, Red Star and Partizan. This rivalry began right at inception, with both clubs starting up in 1945. They both have dominated football and basketball in domestic competition ever since. The football rivalry is highly regarded worldwide as being one of the fiercest ones. The highest attendance for a Red Star Partizan match was on the 7th of November 1976. Red Star sold 90,000 tickets, but it's estimated that there were around 100,000 spectators at the Red Star Stadium. If you've ever seen the Eternal Rivalry, the most memorable part of the match isn't even what's happening on the pitch. This derby is defined by loud, chanting mobs of Serbs, the banging of drums from ultras, and pyrotechnics going off for nearly every seat in the stands. I mean, do the supporters even know what's happening in the game when all this is going on? The Red Star supporters are known as the Delije, which roughly translates to heroes. The club relies so heavily on these fans that they designated the north end of their stadium to them, writing out their title with seat colors in this section. Partizan supporters, on the other hand, are known as the Grobari, meaning gravediggers or undertakers. Heroes versus the Gravediggers in the Eternal Rivalry? No wonder this dramatic, dark derby captures the imagination of so many fans in Europe and all around the world. It's one of the most metal sporting events you can watch. Although these next two teams share the same home city of Istanbul, the clubs are technically split by a continental divide, with the Galatasaray support coming from the European side and Fenerbahce's fans hailing from the Asian side, just across the Bosphorus Strait, the small river dividing the two continents. Galatasaray was founded in 1905 by a group of high school students, and Fenerbahce was founded less than 2 years later by a group of men in Kadıköy, a region of the capital. The Galatasaray High School was an institution designed for the elite of the Ottoman Empire to receive a French language education, so this group of boys came from the old money of Istanbul's high society. On the other hand, Fenerbahce arose from the new money businessmen of the quickly expanding Anatolia, who were described as hardworking and ambitious. Surprisingly, despite being sworn enemies, the club's presidents met in 1912 to discuss a possible merger deal to form the Turkish club, aiming to combat the 4 other teams in the major league at the time, which were primarily composed of Greek, English, and Armenian minorities. However, their ethnicist plans were never able to take shape due to the Balkan Wars in 1913, and they were sworn enemies once more. This rivalry kept bubbling up over decades, despite there not being a nationwide league in Turkey yet. This came to an explosive climax in 1934 in a not-so-friendly match. Both teams wanted to win so badly that the match resembled more of a gladiatorial event than a game of football. In fact, their challenges became so reckless and forceful that the head referee decided to call the game off and abandon the match. Slide tackles so violent that the game is cancelled? Eat your heart out, Roy Keane. After the Super League was introduced in 1959, and there was finally a unified national league, the Intercontinental Derby only grew in popularity. The social class differences between the clubs may have faded over time, but the hatred towards rival fan bases hasn't changed a bit. Although Galatasaray is currently seen as the more successful club, the derby itself is one of the closest of any, with Fenerbahce winning 149, Galatasaray winning 130, with an incredible 124 draws. The Clásico, being a term used to describe the biggest derby in a country, was actually founded in Argentina by the rivalry between River Plate and Boca Juniors, used around the world today by Spain, Mexico, and other languages equivalent. Because of this and the mere size of the fan base in Argentina, this is considered by many to be the most influential and biggest football rivalry in all of world football, even above El Clasico. Both clubs have the exact same origin story, starting in La Boca, the working class dock area of Buenos Aires. However, despite their working class roots, River Plate actually moved to the affluent suburb of Núñez in 1925, and since then, the rivalry has been much more economically and politically charged, with River being nicknamed Los Millonarios, which I don't think needs any translating. The Boca fans call River supporters and players chickens, saying they have no guts or integrity. The River fans call the Boca community pigs, as they come from the lower class harbor region of the capital, and took over the stadium after River Plate's exodus to the northern region. The Scottish derby, known as the Old Firm Derby, involves two of the most trophied clubs in all of Europe, Glasgow's Celtic and Rangers. They've dominated the Scottish League for over 100 years, and until recent times, they were also some of the most feared teams in European competitions, defined by their heart, grit, and physicality. Much like the Scottish people as a whole, this is naturally one of the most violent and passionate fan bases clashing, which makes the Old Firm Derby an international spectacle. The origin of this term is unclear, but may derive from the two clubs' initial match in which the commentators referred to the teams as, like, two old firm friends. Another theory stems from a 1904 cartoon published in the Scottish Referee sports newspaper, which shows an old man with a sign that says, "Patronize the old firm, Rangers Celtic Limited," joking about the immense amount of money the fixture generates. But despite being business partners, there's a deep-seated divide between the two clubs that dates all the way back to the 1800s. Celtic was founded in 1887 by a group of Irish Catholic immigrants to help the poverty-stricken Irish immigrants in East Glasgow. This was not only great for the economy, pumping lots of money into the Irish community, it was also great for the sport across the nation, as the previously uninterested Irish Catholics in Scotland quickly fell in love with the team, and hence the Scottish League. Rangers, the older of the two clubs, was founded in 1872. Although they shared the same hometown, their fans were very different than the Celtic faithful. Rangers fans were primarily Protestant and tended to vote Conservative, whereas the Catholic Celts were almost entirely aligned with the Labour Party. This political disagreement and secular differences are both felt on the pitch and in the stands, with the two supporting fan sections often being divided by a line of police and security guards. Similar to El Clasico, these two clubs are by far the most decorated in their nation, with one of the teams winning the league title in every season since 1985. For the next derby, we'll be heading over to the home of football. Now, there are so many prestigious historical rivalries in Brazil, and it could definitely be an entire video of its own. But if you have to choose one that's the largest of them all, it would probably have to be the fight for Sao Paulo between Corinthians and Palmeiras. Known as the Derby Paulista, this Brazilian battle involves two of the oldest teams in the country. Corinthians was founded in 1910 in association with the lower class population of Sao Paulo. Palmeiras was founded just 4 years later by the large Italian population in the city, under the name Palestra Italia. This rivalry was immortalized after an 8-0 thrashing in 1933, Corinthians' worst defeat to this day. The fans were so outraged that they overthrew the president of the club and set fire to the headquarters. I can't say I've ever seen a coup for a football club before. After World War II, Palestra Italia were forced to change their name due to its reference to the Axis powers, and throughout the rest of the 20th century, this rivalry was defined by some insane scorelines, with both sides experienced both triumphant wins and heavy defeats. They say form goes out the window on Derby Day, and this couldn't be more true for the Derby Paulista. Brazilian footy is played with such a passion and emotion that gives these games a level of unpredictability. In almost 400 meetings of the two clubs, Palmeiras have only managed 3 more wins than Corinthians. If you stuck around until now, you've made it to the final bonus derby. Unlike any other rivalry on earth, this fixture isn't world famous due to its violent history, its world-class superstars, or even the club's hatred for each other. This derby is special due to the conditions in which the players have to compete. This rivalry, known as La Paz Classic, takes place in the capital city of Bolivia at an incredible 12,000 feet above sea level. This 100-year-old clash between Bolivar and the strongest is truly unlike any other. Natives of La Paz may be used to this altitude, but this isn't the case for visiting sides. For example, visitors Argentina, led by Messi, were defeated 6-1 at La Paz Stadium, despite rostering a much more experienced and impressive squad than the Bolivians. For this reason, there was actually a temporary ban on Bolivia, Ecuador, and Colombia hosting home matches for the World Cup qualifiers. Being at such a high altitude, for those who aren't acclimated to the environment, causes a number of health issues that can clearly affect the outcome of a match. Dizziness, nausea, and even swelling of the brain are all side effects of the reduced oxygen levels in the atmosphere at this elevation, and this makes La Paz Classico so much more dramatic than any other derby in world football. Players have become ill, been issued oxygen masks, and even fainted during this matchup, making it an unpredictable, high-stakes derby day unlike any other. Thanks for watching till the end of this video. If you haven't already, consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it goes a long way in supporting this channel. Which rivalries did I miss? Would you want to see a part 2 of this series? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next video. Peace.